This is 17 books, the amount of books that I read this year. And this is 72 books, the amount of books that I read in 2016. I've let myself go. As each year has passed, for some reason I've read less and less. And as someone who values learning, this both scares me and frustrates me. Because books are awesome. World experts will distill 20 years of research into 200 pages. Or the most successful people have a bare rule to tell you exactly how they did it. Or authors can just take you away to a new world that feels almost real. Reading makes you more interested and also more interesting. So I want to start doing more of it again. I want to read 52 books next year. And here's my plan.
So step one is to know your goal. To go from 17 books a year to 52, it's quite a big jump, about 3 times the amount. So I need to break this down into something that seems more manageable. And so the first thing I'm going to do is calculate my reading speed. And to do that, I'm just going to go on a few different websites that offer free reading speed tests.
A few moments later.
Okay, so I've just done 3 different tests, and the overall average of how many words a minute I'm reading is
me. So I was just watching this back in the edit, and to be honest, my explanation of the maths is absolutely shocking. It was a literal car crash. So instead, we're going to make things a little bit easier. So the average non-fiction book, which is what I typically read, is between 250 and 300 pages. So we'll take the upper limit of that. And the average page in those books contains 300 words. And the average reading speed is 250 words per minute. But chances are, because you're watching this, you're above average. So let's say 300 words a minute. So what that means is it takes you 1 minute to read 1 page. So if we times 1 times 300, that basically means it takes you 300 minutes to read the average book, which in other words is 5 hours. And if you times that 5 by 52, then that means it takes you 260 hours to read 52 books. And 260 times by 60 is 15,600 minutes. And say you'll end up reading 300 days of the year, because there's going to be days where you're doing stuff from dusk till dawn, you're on trips, you're seeing friends and family, there's going to be a couple of sick days, maybe some hangover days, where you're just not going to get any reading done. So that means we'll take off 15,600 and divide that by 300, which actually gives us 52. So ironically, if you want to read 52 books a year, then you just have to read 52 minutes a day. So that seems pretty manageable, right? So now that we know the goal, we need to work out, well, what's the strategy to actually make this happen? And step number 2 is to become a book slut. Pretty much my whole life I've been monogamous with books. I'll only start a new one if I finish the previous one. But what I've started doing recently, which is actually up the amount of reading that I'm doing, is being a bit more polyamorous with my books. In other words, having multiple books on the go. I'll often have a main book, but then a couple of side books that I'll often dip into here and there. Not like that. So right now I'm reading a book on running, one on tech product management, and also one on the origins and culture of Disney Pixar. And for each of these books, none of them are ones that I could just sit down and read 100 pages in one sitting or in one day. Instead, they're all ones that it's actually best to just read in little small dosages, taking little snippets here and there of, which is something I found to be better if you're someone who reads non-fiction books, because our brains just crave novelty. Say if you read 100 pages in a day and all 100 are from one book, what you typically find is that a lot of the information just blurs into one. You might remember 1 or 2 really key interesting things, but everything else just becomes a bit vague. But if you read 33.3 pages from 3 different books, chances are you're probably going to remember a lot more, because you can approach them separately and just tackle them in smaller dosages. Think back to when you were in school. You'd have 5 or 6 lessons a day, and they'd be in 5 or 6 different subjects. If you were to have 5 English lessons a day, you would just get bored, and most of the information would just blur into one, and you wouldn't really be able to remember that much. And if you're like me, there's probably been times where your reading has halted or not progressed because some books you read end up just being a bit of a slog, or you're just not in the right mood to read that. So it's far better just have multiple books on the go, so you can just dip in and out depending on the mood that you're in. Ones that might be a bit more of an easy read when you're not up for something that's really tough and a bit of a slog. But yeah, having multiple books on the go has helped me massively, and I know that it will help me read a lot more next year. Anyway, being a book slut is still a bit unstructured and a bit sloppy, and it's not necessarily going to guarantee that you'll get through all the books in the year. So step 3 is to
schedule it until it's a habit. So back when I read 72 books in 2016, that was actually very simple and easy to achieve, because although I set myself the goal of reading 52 books again there, I exceeded my expectations by just sticking to reading during my commute. And I used to work in London and have a 45-minute commute each way. Easy, hour and a half a day reading. And midway through that year, I became self-employed, and I was traveling a lot more, going from client to client, sometimes up to 3 hours a day. So reading just became super easy because I had nothing else to do then. But now I work from home and I haven't got a commute. It's all too easy to waste my time watching shit on YouTube like you are now, or just scrolling through social media. So I know I've got to schedule in my reading into my calendar with phone reminders, otherwise I just won't do it. And thinking about those 52 minutes a day, I'm just going to read 11 minutes before work, 11 minutes at lunchtime, and then 30 minutes either before dinner or just before I go to bed. Bam, it's that simple. But I know to stick to this, there's still going to be some challenges. So the next step in my plan is
don't read what you don't have to. So have you ever read a non-fiction book where it's got 30-page chapters, and after 10 pages of each chapter, you get the general point. And then for the next 20 pages,
the author just dances around the point or just flat out repeats himself. Yep, it's happened to me a lot too. But for some reason you feel compelled to make sure that you read every single page and every single word on all of those pages. For me, I used to have this stupid reading rule that I had to read every single page and every single word on it. And if I didn't, it was disrespectful to the book. But here's the thing, books don't have feelings, and if you've spent your own money on it, you can do whatever you want with it. So nowadays, when I'm reading a book, I don't mind skipping through a few pages. If one, it's a repeat of what's already come before, or two, if it's stuff I already know. So for me, the main type of book I like to read is pop psychology books, either self-help or where it's an actual professor and they've simplified their life's work into a book for a lay audience. And here's the thing, a lot of them just mention the same psychological concepts or psychological studies, and as someone with 2 degrees in psychology, there's only so many times I can read about the same studies time and time again. So when I'm reading these books now, as soon as I see a name of a psychologist or a name of a study that I know, I'll just automatically skip 5 pages. And honestly, I don't feel guilty about this. I used to think that this was cheating, but why waste time on things that you already know or things you already got a fairly good grasp of? Obviously, the caveat is when you're reading fiction, if you skip over 5 pages, you're probably going to miss a key plot twist. But for non-fiction, just remember you don't owe the book anything, and you just have to read whatever it is that's actually going to help you expand your knowledge or understanding of something. And that last bit is actually a bit of a lie, because the last part of my plan is just read what you want to read. Seems obvious, right? But back in 2016, when I was reading all those books, I realized now that I was actually reading a lot of books I thought I should be reading. I Googled 100 books that everyone in their 20s should read, or the top 10 must books to understand people. And for the most part, this did kind of serve me well, but it also did trap me into reading a certain type of book. Now, I'm grateful to have read a lot of those books, and particularly ones related to my specialist subject, but I've realized that over time, the main reason I haven't read as much anymore is because I just haven't been reading what I actually want to read. So much of my reading has been, oh, will this make me more of an expert in this subject? Or this is a book that loads of successful people have supposedly read, so I want to be like them, so I'm going to read it as well. And I felt a lot of the time I had to read these types of books, and it kind of just reminded me of the education system where you have to read set texts that you have exams on, or you get set reading lists where you have to do all the reading. And it just makes reading become a chore. But here's the thing, when you're an adult, you can read whatever you want. And so I'm just going to do that. I'm going to read more fiction. I'm going to read books that don't actually have any practical value to me. I'm going to read books I just like the title of, books that I just like the cover of. And I think you should too. So I hope this also gives you a plan to read more books next year. And let me know your book recommendations in the comments. Always looking for new ones. And I'll see you in the next one.